Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I know pandemic mornings are maybe stranger than regular mornings, so we're really grateful to have you here with us. I'm Sam. I've lived in Swissvale for about 11 years, and I'm one of the lead organizers with the Swissvale Community Action Committee. The Swissvale Community Action Committee is comprised of impassioned residents of the borough of Swissvale, and the mission of SCAC is to connect Swissvalians to create a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable community. And we have been around in one form or another since about 2013, founded by Leland Scales, a lifelong Swissvale resident. We pursue our mission through a variety of ways, and particularly in pandemic times when we can't actually physically connect in gatherings, we have been trying to provide resources and connect neighbors in ways where we can all support each other during these challenging times. The How to Run and electoral resources kind of started up in one form or another in 2017, and then again ramped up in 2019, where we essentially realized that if people wanted to run for local office, finding the information about when petitions were due and what was actually required was inordinately difficult. So we thought that's silly. Especially because you only need 10 petitions. It's not like you need to have a massive budget for TV commercials or anything. So we really wanted to lower the barriers to running for local office, but particularly lower the barriers to the information. That's really a big piece of what we're trying to do with a lot of what we do with SCAC. So I think we can go to the next slide. I think I probably covered what's on the next. Yeah, just introduction to SCAC in general. So the overview, just another quick thing. There's 9 leader folks of SCAC that sort of drive who we are, and several of us are here. And as folks are presenting, they'll introduce themselves a little bit. But just know that like we're always accessible through the contact information, like our website, swissvalecommunity@gmail.com. And we're very much not thinking about the work that we do in the community as a top-down scenario where we decide what is needed and then make it happen. We really want feedback and input from you all. So we want you to understand that like we see this as like we are sort of facilitators of the community that exists, not really leaders. So the agenda for today is to go over the offices that are up for election, how to get on the ballot, campaigning, and some resources. We have said in the lead up to this that we're obviously focusing on Swissvale and the districts that Swissvale is in for like school director, but the rules and the requirements that we're going to go over are for Pennsylvania boroughs. So if you are in the borough of Edgewood or any other borough in Pennsylvania, the information that we're going to share is going to be relevant or it's going to be applicable. So after each section, we will pause and see if any of you all have questions. And then we also are really big on not making up answers when we don't know. So we have done a tremendous amount of research to create this workshop and to create the guide that we also sent to you. But that doesn't mean that we know everything, because unfortunately, electoral law and campaign finance and stuff in this country is inordinately complicated. So if you have a question and we don't know, we will take that down and essentially say, we don't know, but we will do our best to find out. And so that'll be the parking lot where we're not going to say we don't know, screw you. And we're not going to make something up. So just know that, any question is welcome. But we are not perfect. So I guess I'm going to kick it back to Miranda to get us started. This is Porter.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to mute so that you don't hear him whining.
All right, Rachel, we can go to the next slide. So hi again, I'm Miranda. And so just kind of to provide a little bit more context to kind of the lay of the land in Pennsylvania and where we are within that, as Sam mentioned, we're going to focus on boroughs. In Pennsylvania, there are, I'll just estimate, a bajillion municipalities. We're one of the most fragmented states when it comes to local government. There are various levels of local government. So there are also county positions. We haven't really addressed those so much in this presentation, but there are a few things that some information we can help provide perhaps after the fact. But there's one county level position that's for election this year, which is our county council member. But we are, again, primarily focusing on boroughs, which there are obviously a lot of in Pennsylvania. And the primary characteristic of boroughs versus some of the other local government that you might be more familiar with, because we hear it in the news, such as cities, for example, is that boroughs have a weak mayor system. And essentially, that means the mayor isn't driving things like legislation and budgets and things like that. That is driven by the council in a weak mayor system. So we're going to go over all the different roles and things for mayors and council members, because those are both up for election this year. Townships, completely different, have supervisors, generally speaking, or commissioners. Cities are a strong mayor system in general. Just one quick note, I don't think we have anybody from a home rule other than Pittsburgh, which I know Jay is in, but home rule is something that boroughs can do. So for example, our Braddock Borough, I think, just passed home rule. We also have in this area, Clairton, Monroeville are also home rule. And that means basically they can kind of make up rules that are outside, they can kind of provide their own structure that is outside of some of the things of like the Pennsylvania Borough Code. So our borough is not home rule. Most boroughs are not. And they're driven by the Pennsylvania Borough Code. So that's where we are. And there is kind of an explainer in our guide that is linked in the guide from WHYY, which is an explainer on cities, townships, and boroughs and all the different Pennsylvania municipalities. We can go ahead to the next slide, Rachel. So, as Sam said, it's a low entry point to get into local politics. And yet a lot of people don't. And I think, a lot of folks that didn't grow up in that political system don't sometimes understand how to access it. And we wanted to make sure that that was something that we could help with, because one of our goals being equity in Swissvale, you really can't have that when not everyone has access to the same information and to the same kind of resources. And, I personally sort of got involved in Swissvale political world, I guess, mostly about 5 years ago, and started attending more borough council meetings and things like that, and realized pretty quickly how much of a huge impact small group of citizens can have, as well as, how much impact those local elected officials have on our daily lives here in Swissvale and in any borough. And so, the importance of that local start, to me is pretty amazing to think about, like how much you can really influence everything from, of course, the money in folks' pockets when it comes to taxes and things like that. But, other really important things like, non-discrimination, police hiring, things like that are really accessible and can be controlled by local citizens and the folks who run for those local offices. And it's pretty easy to get started. It definitely can cost you less than $250, which is the limit for campaign finance, which we'll talk about. And all it takes is going to a couple of local events, maybe meeting a few neighbors, and it's something that you can really do. And we really think it's imperative that more folks seek and run for local office. All right, go ahead, Rachel, to the next one. So what's up for local election in 2021? Now, this is in Swissvale. If you're in another borough, you might find that some different combination of elections are up for office, but you can see on the screen what's up. We've got borough council, mayor, tax collector, school board directors, judges and inspectors of elections, a county council seat. And in Swissvale in particular, something to note is that we're in a majority Democratic area. Democrats control fairly a lot in Swissvale. What that means is our local elections oftentimes are decided at the primary. So that is in May. That's May 18th this coming year. Or this year rather. And so you will find the biggest contest is that primary because many people are registered as Democrats or run as Democrats, as you know, we have seen on occasion folks that have switched parties and run as a Democrat because local elections are often in that primary and because we have so many more registered Democrats. Now, that being said, that does make Swissvale really attractive potentially to folks wanting to run a third party candidacy because there aren't that many registered Republicans. And that's interesting, Jay, that Edgewood is majority Democrat, but majority controlled by Republicans. But third-party candidacies are something that, you know, are kind of ripe for the running here in Swissvale because of that situation. So they obviously don't run in the primary, they only run in the general. So there's some opportunities there. All right, let's go ahead, Rachel, to the next screen, please. So something to note is that this election that we're having in 2021 has like the most seats that you see out of any 4-year to 5-year cycle available for election. So we've got more things available for election right now this year than we will in the next 4 years. And that's because of the rotations of, you know, how many seats are up for office at any given time, as well as some things are only going to be up for office you know, every 4 years, and they happen to be up this year, so they're not going to come again until 4 years down the road from now. So you can see in this chart that, you know, we've got a lot of things up for election this year. Next year, the only thing that's going to be up for election in a local sense, I mean, obviously there are going to be other statewide elections, but in the local elections, only Democratic committee people will be up. And then in 2023, we've only got, you know, a magisterial district judge and a school board and council. So this year's a big year in effect. All right, Rachel, we can go to the next one. So we'll go through some of these offices and what they mean and what's going on, you know, what kind of duties they have and things like that. So we're going to kick it off with Borough Council. I think the majority of the folks that registered were going to be interested in council for sure, and possibly mayor, admitting a few folks from the waiting room. So Borough Council, which this picture is kind of funny because if you don't know, we no longer have a council chambers. It fell off the building this year. And so, yeah, that's going to be pretty, oh, there's Dominic. That we don't know where council is going to meet, but right now they meet on Zoom anyway because it's a pandemic. So, all right. So who's eligible? What does this office do? You know, those are the things that we want to cover for each of these things. So first of all, there's 7 total council members. 4 of those are going to be up for election this year. Those 4 people are Abigail Salisbury, who's the current council president. She was elected in 2017. So she's only done 1 term. Sean Alfonso Wells, who this time she was appointed in 2020 to fill the position vacated by Julie Gross. She had also been appointed in 2019 to fill a vacated position that was up for election. So she's actually kind of been around since 2019, but she had a break in there where she wasn't on council. Michelle Stanton, who has been on council since 2009. She was the previous council president before Ms. Salisbury. And David Petrarca, who has been on council since 2005. He was also a previous council president before Ms. Stanton. So those are the folks that are up for election this year. eligibility is you've got to be at least 18 years old and a registered voter in Swissvale and a resident of Swissvale for 1 year, at least 1 year. So as far as what the council members do, remember we're in a weak mayor system, so the council has a lot of power in a borough. And they're basically the legislative body. They're the ones that are putting out and maybe directing the solicitor to put together an ordinance, for example, that might control something in the borough. One recent example of that is they were just talking about, which will be voted on at the next meeting, amending the graffiti ordinance in order to put those terrible "We Buy Houses" signs and things like that as part of the graffiti ordinance. So that's something that the council is deciding on. Something that's probably coming up in the next couple of years because of things that have been going on in the borough. There's going to be some changes to the zoning ordinance, ridding it of some bizarre language, and also doing things like revising the urban agriculture and chicken ordinance, for example, or that's part of zoning now, and they're going to kind of pull it out most likely. Council currently has some interest in doing a non-discrimination ordinance, as well as the current council president has talked about doing something related to some sort of a quasi decriminalization of marijuana. It doesn't happen in the same way in a borough, but that's something that is of interest and might be upcoming in the council. So those are the kinds of things that our council votes on, as well as a whole lot of more mundane things from day to day. From meeting to meeting, rather. There are lots of different positions within the council. There's a president and a vice president, and then there's all these committees that kind of meet and discuss things. So right now there's a diversity and equity inclusion committee that's brand new. There's also a building committee because they're trying to figure out what to do with the borough building, if we're going to build a new one or reuse the old one, things like that. The council also manages borough personnel. So they are in charge of the folks at the borough serve at their pleasure. For example, the borough manager, the finance director, that's a position that's up right now. But also it includes hiring and firing police, fire, public works, and positions like that. So that is all under the control of the council. So this is again, a big, strong council system. And, the council provides for, by directing DPW and things like that, the municipal services, garbage, roads, anything like that is all, at the direction of the council. They're establishing the tax rate and they're bringing forth the budget, usually out of the finance committee. So those are all important things that the borough council gets into. Now, time commitment, it's not a full-time job. You get paid, it's $2,500 a year in compensation. There are 2 meetings a month that you need to attend. There are 1 to 2 to, well, on occasion, 3 hours per meeting. And some active council members spend more like 5 to 10 hours a week on borough-related business, attending other committee meetings and reviewing documents and things like that. There's training available through the local government academy. After you're elected, there's a new elected officials course, so you can get much more familiar with borough government. But we definitely would recommend, attending meetings via Zoom, because they all are held, they're all on Facebook now. So you residents can't attend via Zoom, but you can watch them on Facebook, which is a big actual improvement that council started live streaming those meetings a while ago, even when they were in person, kind of at the request of a lot of us in SCAC and a lot of other folks in the community to make those meetings more accessible. So you can attend those via Facebook. And would definitely recommend going back through old meetings and things like that as well. All right, we can go to the next one. All right, so mayor is up for election this year. And this, again, is kind of an interesting one because, we are that weak mayor system. What does a mayor do? What does it mean? So this is a 4-year cycle. Again, there is one position. Obviously, it's currently occupied by Mayor Deneen Schwartzwelder, who has been the mayor since 2005. You have to be 18 years old. You have to be a registered elector in the district, and you have to be a resident of Swissvale for at least 1 year. And that all applies if you're not in Swissvale. Those same rules apply to any borough anywhere. So what does a mayor do? So again, we're a weak mayor, so they're not proposing ordinances, generally speaking. They're not proposing their own budget, generally speaking. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that a mayor can do. There are some things prescribed by law a mayor can do, and there are some things that mayors do outside of those duties for the benefit of their boroughs, if they want. Not all of them do. So some of the basics are they administer oaths. They actually administer oaths for new borough members, and then they preside over the annual organizational meeting, which is where they decide who's council president and things like that. They just preside over it. They don't vote in it. But they can vote to break ties in council. So that's something that's important to note. Even though a mayor doesn't generally vote, they can vote to break a tie. They don't have to necessarily. So for example, this past year in Swissvale, there was a situation where it was deemed the mayor had a conflict of interest and could not break that tie. So there is that kind of situation as well. They have some powers to declare an emergency, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that done in Swissvale, although perhaps it has been done. And they can kind of take some special actions during that time, like deputizing people to like help with that emergency. Kind of an interesting role. They do administer the police department. So this role is a little bit interesting. There are things that the council does and things that the mayor does related to the police department. Some of the day-to-day kind of thing can be administered by the mayor, but the mayor cannot vote on hiring and firing. That being said, in Swissvale, the mayor does sit on the police committee and is involved in interviewing officers or potential officers. So there is a role in that hiring in some respects, but they do not get to vote on it. They also, we kind of recently figured out, are involved in police discipline to some extent. We had asked some questions about the discipline process, especially as it relates to the new body cameras that Swissvale will be that Swissvale now has, and the mayor can impose up to a 10-day suspension for an officer, but anything beyond that is done by council and can be reviewed by council. So council has some say in discipline, but the mayor has kind of that initial disciplinary responsibility. And they can take part in council discussions, and they can take part in discussing ordinances and things like that. They don't vote on them initially unless there's a tiebreaker. They can technically veto them. So they can, if an ordinance comes up that a mayor is completely, opposed to, ordinances have to be signed by the mayor. They can veto that ordinance. I've never seen that happen in Swissvale. Maybe it has at some point in time. I've never seen it. But they have that power. But if the mayor vetoes it, it gets sent back to the council, and the council can overrule that veto by majority +1. So, so it is a role that they can serve and perhaps exert some influence. They can also perform marriages. So if you want to do that, that's something fun that a mayor can do. They also, there are those outside roles of mayors as kind of spokespeople for the borough. Our mayor hasn't particularly taken on that role much. You can look to some other boroughs for examples of mayors that have taken on different roles. John Fetterman is certainly one that comes to mind. Sharday Jones in Braddock is one that comes to mind as well. There are probably a few others that I'm not thinking of right now that, have taken on different roles of bringing in businesses, kind of acting as a cheerleader for the borough, acting as a spokesperson, getting out there in front of the media if there's a shooting, for example. And that's one criticism of our current mayor that I have heard of kind of not providing that role. So those are all things that a mayor does. As far as time commitment goes, again, not a full-time job. Compensation is $2,500 a year. It can technically, by the borough code, go up to $5,000 per year, but in Swissvale, it's $2,500 as of right now. And again, 2 meetings a month. Another mayor that, another mayor has been Marita Garrett, who has kind of taken on a different kind of role in that role as mayor. And, you know, they can be a more active mayor. Now, Marita Garrett was just censured by the council for not fulfilling her duty by their estimation. So there is a lot of different things that can go on related to mayors in a borough. As far as training goes, again, that local government academy is available to all local officials. And so that is definitely something that you know, folks can do. And of course, again, would recommend that folks attend meetings and check that out. In the Pennsylvania Borough Code, that is also something where you can read more about, you know, the roles and responsibilities of a mayor. All right, Rachel, we'll go to the next one. Tax collector. So this is one that's up this year and won't be up again for 4 more years. There's one person in that position, and that is currently occupied by Tom Barr, and he has deputized his wife as a deputy tax collector. And I think he's been in that for about 20 years as well. I didn't get the exact year, but I think he's been there about 20 years. Have to be at least 18 years old, have to be registered in Swissvale or your district, have to be a resident of the borough for a year. There is also a training requirement that you have to complete before you're sworn in. So in between being elected and sworn in, you have to become, I think, a certified tax collector. And you can't hold any other office if you are a tax collector. So what do? They collect taxes. They collect the municipal taxes in Swissvale, as well as the school district taxes. There is another role that they'll play, which I'll talk about in a moment, that is kind of outside the purview of tax collector officially. But basically they're collecting and levying those taxes. In Swissvale, they're not really responsible for being like delinquent collectors for like school district taxes. That's done through someone else. Yeah, so that is essentially the role of the tax collector. Now there is, like I said, there's training available for that. As far as time commitment, it's about a 20-hour per week commitment. The tax collector office needs to be obviously open. We have a picture of the tax collector office here because this comes into play with the compensation. They actually have an office right now that is separate from our borough building. It's over by Needs Funeral Home. And that's if you're familiar with going to the office to pay your taxes, which I'm not, although I guess we've gone to for garbage purposes, but that's kind of separate. But that's where their office is. Compensation. This is something has recently come up in a council meeting. Watch the last council meeting on Facebook for a really in-depth on compensation of the tax collector, because it has been brought up several times because the way it's described is very confusing. And folks have thought it's a percentage of taxes, and folks have thought many different things, or that they get a base plus a percentage of taxes, things like that. So, in Swissvale right now, what it is the tax collector gets $9,600 from the borough of Swissvale and a little over $16,000 from the school district, because they also collect those taxes. So it amounts to almost $26,000 for this position. This particular tax collector also entered into a separate contract to collect the garbage fees. So that's not guaranteed to a tax collector. So if you get elected tax collector, there's no guarantee that you will also be the collector of garbage fees, but the current tax collector is. So that's a separate year-by-year contract with the borough. And they get about $13,000 a year for that, I believe. So adding those three up, it's a relatively decent amount of money. The Swissvale also probably in their next meeting on Wednesday will vote on paying for some additional services for that tax collector. So right now they pay for the tax collector's office. They're also going to now be paying for utilities for the tax collector. And I think we already pay like phone and internet and things like that too. So they're going to essentially kind of up that compensation by about $600 a year, not by much. But yeah, there's some interesting discussion on it at the last meeting. But that's what's up with tax collector. And Rachel, you can go ahead again. All right, so school board is another super important position that is up for election this year. And Woodland Hills School District is a large district. It has 9 school directors. There are 3 different regions covering all of the communities within the Woodland Hills School District. We are in Region 2. With some other communities. We're in that region with Braddock, and Rankin, and Edgewood. And all the other municipalities are broken up into the 2 other regions. So it's a staggered election cycle. 5 of them come available one year, and then 4 years later, 4 of them become available. So for excuse me, for Region 2, we have one of those up for election this year. And if you're on from Edgewood, that's also, you're part of this region as well. So you'd be up eligible this year as well for that position. You have to be a resident of the school board district. So resident of District 2 for at least 1 year. You have to be at least 18 years old. Those are the requirements for school director. Now, you don't have to have a kid in the district or anything like that, but you can run for that without having that direct connection to the district. So what do? They are essentially the local voice in the school process. They're also, in some respects, also representing the State Board of Education on that local level. So basically like making decisions that kind of follow along with the State Department of Education on the local level, and kind of taking in the input of the local folks. And the community's interests. So they're going to employ the superintendent, so they can hire and fire the superintendent. That just recently happened in the last couple of years, where they hired a superintendent and did a search for that position. They're adopting policies and curriculum and the budget, so they are kind of in charge. Now, of course, a lot of that comes at the recommendation of different committees and different folks within the school. But they have a lot of control over what happens in that school district. So recent topics that have come up, one of the things that they do is they can approve or deny charter school applications, which is important to some folks. Now, sometimes even if they deny, sometimes those things get overturned, but neither here nor there. They have that first level of decision-making on charter schools. They also recently were making decisions relating to policing in the school district. So some pretty important topics, all of them really. Something to note is also they oversee facilities in the district. One of those facilities is the Swissvale Library. It's a very unusual arrangement, but the Swissvale Library is technically controlled by the Woodland Hills School District. And then, of course, they do things like adopt collective bargaining units for the teachers' unions and whatnot. So they have a lot more time commitment on average, I think. They have 2 official meetings per month, just like our borough officials, but then they have committee meetings, and each person is on 2 or more committees. So they're meeting a lot and they might be going to additional school district activities and whatnot. So a total of at least 10 to 15 hours per month for a school board member. There's no compensation for school board members. So unlike our council, which gets $2,500, school board does not get compensated. There is training available. There is, you can certainly watch previous meetings and whatnot through the Woodland Hills website. The Pennsylvania School Board Association does offer trainings for new school board members, and they have a lot of resources on their website as well. All right, next up, Rachel. Judge of elections. This is one that we heard a lot about this year, and it's up this year, and it won't be up again for another 4 years. So if you had concerns about the way the election was run, or had any weird things happen, or just want to make sure good folks are in those kind of positions for the future, this is an important one. Judge of elections. There are 11 total positions for this. So in Swissvale, we have 11 voting districts. And so each one of those has their own judge of elections. And they are 4-year terms, and it's not staggered. So again, there will be none of these up for election again until 4 years from now. You have to be at least 18 years old and a registered elector of that district. When these aren't filled, these can get appointed by the county. So something to note. And I believe that has happened here in Swissvale. So what does the judge of elections do? They are responsible for that polling place. So they've got to go and pick up all the voter registration binders, paperwork, all the materials, things like that. They have to verify the voting machines. They swear in poll workers on the day of the election. They organize all the poll worker activity, like you do this, who's going to be at the machines, who's going to be checking folks in. After the polling places close, they are tallying the votes, and they are posting the official elections returns and certifying those outside of the polling place and making sure that those get to the county. So very important position. Not a lot of time commitment outside of the day of voting, but a big time commitment that day, at least 15 hours probably on that day. So it is a very long day for folks. And that is, obviously for the primary and for the general election each year. There are some trainings available, and that would be outside of election day, obviously, and some additional time. They are compensated about $140 per day, election day worked. And like I mentioned, there is training available for that. And minority and majority inspector, Rachel, we can go to the next slide, please. Majority and minority inspector, kind of similar in some ways to judge of elections, some less responsibilities, but they are also on that 4-year term. They are not staggered. So again, this will not come up until 4 years from now again. They are sometimes filled by curbside elections rather than the ballot. The judge of elections can kind of pull people in and say, all right, you're going to be my inspector of elections, because oftentimes not all of these positions go filled by election. They are, eligibility is you have to be a registered elector in the district. You have to be at least 18 years old. And the thing about this one is if two or more folks are running for this position, the person that gets the most votes becomes the majority inspector. The person who gets the second most vote becomes the minority inspector. And then again, they're assisting the judge of elections essentially with running that polling place, maybe assigned other duties by the judge of elections that day. There is compensation for this, about $115 per election day worked, and there is training that the Allegheny County Elections Division does provide. All right, and we'll go to the next one real quick. So we just wanted to note here that all of these positions, essentially, these are all public positions, and when these bodies meet, those are public meetings that are unless a very few limited set of circumstances can discussions take place out of the public view. So if council wants to discuss an ordinance that's coming up, for example, they can't discuss with each other, all of them at once, unless they're in front of the public. If one or two of them ask each other questions, that's allowable, but they cannot discuss the decision-making unless it's in public. A few set of circumstances where that doesn't have to happen are things like personnel matters, for example, legal matters that pertain to the borough that they need to discuss in private, and those are called executive sessions. And those should be used relatively in a very limited fashion. Some boroughs recently have gotten in trouble for having those executive sessions or unofficial executive sessions happen outside of council meetings. And They also have to announce that they're going into executive sessions. So just so you know, when you're getting involved in these positions, your discussions and everything like that, those things are all public, as they should be. Folks should know. So we're always trying to keep tabs on things and get more information out to the public about what's going on as well. So that is a little ditty on the Sunshine Act. Rachel, next slide, please. So at this point, we can have questions for you, or questions from you, and also things for you to be considering as we're taking questions, or which things are you qualified for? Probably all of them. And which office do you think might be a best fit for you? So that's something to consider as we've kind of just reviewed all of these positions. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and take questions from the audience. If you would like to raise a hand, if you'd like to put it in the chat box, if you have any questions.
Can I ask a question or
Yeah.
make a statement and then ask a question?
Sure.
Thanks, Miranda. First, I really appreciate that you're doing this. I've lived here in Swissvale since 1997 is when I bought my home here, and have watched some remarkable things happen politically and otherwise in Swissvale since then. First, I just want to let you know I am a judge of elections right now. I have been appointed over and over and over again. I won't go into any details, but I think it was interesting your comment about the curbside. I do think that that's something that Swissvale needs to be taking more seriously, because it's remarkable how much power there is when the Board of Elections is sitting at that table. And I've been directly involved in some of that. So thank you for being candid about that. My question is, it would be interesting whether or not your group would be willing, and I know there's a pandemic going on, to host some sort of town halls, as we get closer to the primaries in the spring, to let people who are interested in these positions speak to the public.
Yes.
And share what their initiatives are, or how they see themselves playing their role.
Yes.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, actually, we've already done that in previous elections, and we plan to do it again. So some of our local government initiatives, we started out with actually some public forums. That was, I think, the 2017 election was the first forum where SCAC basically organized. To that point, I think the only time it had been done, a candidate forum where they were asked questions and could respond to those questions in a public forum. Because you're right. I mean, there has been had been almost no way to find information about the people running for some of these local offices. It was on name recognition, essentially. For many years, people weren't putting out information at all about what they stood for. And that forum was kind of our first, SCAC's first foray into some of this. Since then, we've held many forums, including ones for the state representative races and things like that. And last local election, we held one as well. So yes, so at this point, which we'll talk about at the end, we've got something on February 17th, which is kind of more like a mixer, like meet and greet with potential candidates in the community. It's virtual. And we did a similar thing last year, or last election cycle, in person over at Pub in the Park. But this year will be virtual. And then we also do plan to hold another forum for those candidates who do get on the ballot and are running. There will be kind of that town hall forum as well. So, yep, we are with you and on it. All right, there was a question that came in. Can somebody, I'm not monitoring chat, so can somebody who is monitoring the chat kind of ask a question?
Sure. So Catherine asked, she said, probably a much bigger question, but how is it not a violation of the Sunshine Act to only have council meetings on Facebook? Could this be considered discriminatory to those without internet access? And I did point out in the chat that this is not the normal condition for borough meetings in Swissvale. While they were streaming them live before the pandemic started, online only access has been a result of COVID-19, but I'll let Miranda answer that more fully.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to add per se, other than that At the
Why are you
beginning
taking
of the pandemic, Swissvale canceled several meetings because they were looking for, is this a solution that's okay? Is this legally allowed? I believe they have to make their best attempt to meet in public, according to our solicitor. And I think according to there were some recent changes to, I don't want to say necessarily in the municipal code, although it may have happened officially in the municipal code. But I know at the beginning of the pandemic, there was some stuff happening in Harrisburg that basically made it allowable for them to make their best effort at a public meeting. And that's what Swissvale chose to do, what was the Facebook access. Not saying that that's perfect and that, I think that there's definitely room to call for more access, and it could potentially get challenged at some point, but I think everybody was like, it was one of those like make the best of a bad situation kind of decisions, I think, for them. But can they hop on Zoom? Oh, and that's a good point, Sam. They did originally claim they were going to stream on YouTube as well. I don't think that's happened. And Jay, that's an excellent point about Zoom. They have not made that available to the public, to my knowledge. Would they if they were asked? That's a good question. That's a really good question. And it could definitely be asked to council.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're not
Sorry.
I'm thinking. Hi.
Catherine's my daughter. This is the whole
Awesome.
pandemic thing where Catherine's name is here. So thank you for fielding my question. Just regardless of the mechanism through which Zoom, whatever,
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, I don't want to go off, I don't want to derail this conversation, but I'll put it out there. It seems problematic to me to make decisions that are discriminatory and use the pandemic as a excuse.
I don't disagree.
So I'll leave it out there.
Yeah.
Poor decision making and defaulting. Well, it's a pandemic. It's still poor decision making. I don't care what. But so I'm Brandon. Catherine's my daughter.
Hello.
Thank you for my question.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think you'd find anybody here disagreeing with you, for sure. And definitely think that like Jay's thing that Zoom does allow people to call in. That is potentially better than just online, but they haven't made it available. So yeah, I would definitely press them on it if it for sure. That is an issue that could be pressed.
And also just build on that to point out if the borough council chambers are currently in a rubble pile in the parking lot, it seems like that even once the pandemic's over, having live meetings might be troubling or might be hard for the foreseeable future, even beyond the pandemic. So that's definitely something that might want to get looked at on a more macro level. So.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely push that with them. I do know they have previously held some live meetings in the fire station, so that could be something that's on their minds as things transition. But yeah, definitely good stuff to press council on. We're always in favor of that as well. All right, I think we should probably turn it over to Laura to get into the getting on the ballot portion of things. So I think I will go ahead and mute myself, and Rachel, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, so like Miranda said, my name's Laura. I'm also involved with SCAC, and this section is for when you have decided which of these offices you're going to run for, and you want to figure out how to actually get on the ballot so people can vote for you. This is often one of the big stumbling blocks for people because this is where you get into a lot of the bureaucratic red tape, and it can be really hard to find practical information about just like step by step what you do. And the stuff that is out there, like no offense to lawyers, but most of it's written by lawyers, and I think that you know what I mean by that. It can be hard to interpret if you're just getting into this for the first time. So this section is just going to break that down a little bit and make sure everyone knows both when different things take place and a better idea of how you would go about going through these steps. So these dates are pulled from the Department of State's election calendar. I'm going to drop the full calendar in the chat here in case anybody wants to see it. But the important thing here is that starting on February 16th, So these are the 2021 dates. You can start circulating and filing nominating petitions. So for anyone who's running under a majority party, so Democrat or Republican, this is basically when your campaign starts because you're getting signatures to get on the ballot. And we're going to go into more details about how that works. But in terms of timeline, February 16th is when the work starts being put in a lot of ways. You can announce a candidacy before that, and a lot of people do. So that doesn't mean you have to wait until then to tell people that you're running. So in terms of kind of what to expect as the spring goes on, you're circulating and getting signatures between February 16th and March 9th if you're running as a Democrat or Republican. In the week after that is when people can object to signatures on your petition if anyone chooses to do so. That's like the window they have to file objections. And you can withdraw your candidacy anytime before March 24th. And then on May 18th is when people go to the polls and vote for you. We're assuming that probably a lot of people this time will still be voting by mail, so a lot of the voting will actually happen before then. But that is the latest that people will be able to vote for you. Next slide, please, Rachel. So for nominating petitions, an important distinction to make is that anybody running as a Democrat or Republican uses the nominating petitions. Anybody running as anything else, including independent or just like anything else, and there's like a huge variety of parties that you can run for. There are things that you've definitely never heard of that people are running for very regularly. Anybody else uses nominating papers, and the form itself is different, and the time frame in which to collect signatures is different. So this section here, I want to be clear, is for anybody running as a Democrat or Republican, and we're going to cover the third party process in a minute. So the time frame for this, like we showed before, is between February 16th and March 9th. That's when you're using this and collecting petitions. They aren't, I don't think they technically have to be available at the county before February 16th, but they might be available a couple of days before then. But what you do is you actually go to the county elections office downtown, which is in the county office building at 542 Forbes Avenue, and you pick up your petitions. You have to make sure that you're using this current year's petition. You can't like have one from before and use it for this year. It has to be for the county that you're running in and for the year that you're using it in. What circulation of this petition looks like is you are filling out the different parts of the petition that we'll cover in the next slide, and you're collecting electors' signatures. So they use the word elector a lot in all of this, and all that means is someone who is registered to vote. So usually what you're looking for is someone who's registered to vote in the district or ward or whatever area that the position that you're running for governs. So for instance, if you're running for borough council, then you're looking for someone within the Swissvale borough limits that you would be governing if you were in that position. In some boroughs, they're separated into different areas like wards, but in Swissvale, everyone in borough council is running at large. We don't have representatives in different sections. For most of the offices, you need to get at least 10 signatures. A weird exception is the inspector of elections, which you only need 5 for. But for everything else that we're talking about, the minimum number of signatures is 10. We would highly, highly, highly recommend that you get more than 10 because this is a very nitpicky process, and there's a lot of reasons why individual signatures you get could be declared invalid. we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but basically, unless like everything is just how it's supposed to be, a signature can be thrown out. And then if you have less than 10 signatures, your candidacy is no longer valid. Another important thing about these petitions is that they need to be notarized before you can file them. So that means that you need to find a notary and get your petitions notarized before you can drop them off at the county office once you're done getting signatures. Going back to the time frame once more. So you have until March 9th to get all of your signatures, but it's a good idea to think about kind of just personally what your time frame is going to be, like what days you think you're going to be getting these signatures. And if you think that you might want to kind of set yourself a personal deadline for when you're going to drop them off at the county office, you don't necessarily want to just assume that you'll go on March 9th. It might be a good idea to go in at least like a couple days before then, just in case anything happens. You don't want to kind of invalidate your own candidacy just by not being able to get there on time because you're sick or something like that. For any of the positions that we're talking about today at the borough level, none of these have a filing fee. So if you were running for something, say on the county level, like the county council seat that's open in our district, that's a different story. But for any of these, you're not submitting a filing fee. So you don't have to like bring a check with you whenever you're dropping off these petitions, but otherwise you would. Rachel, next slide, please. So for understanding the petition itself, it has a few different sections, and it's important whenever you first get your nominating petitions to kind of take a good look through it and make sure you understand what each section contains and the purpose of it to make sure that you're filling it out correctly. It looks like a kind of like crowded, confusing form. So like all crowded, confusing forms, it's a good idea to make sure you understand what you're using. So the first section is the preamble, and that is the section where the candidate's information is written in, and that's when you're basically saying, like, this is my name, this is where I live, this is your party affiliation. And saying that it's important to note that the candidate doesn't necessarily need to be circulating all of the petitions themselves. You can, as long as everyone who is circulating a petition is registered under the same party that you're running under, you can have people help you with this. But that preamble information should always be the candidate's information. We're also going to have the elector signatures section in which each elector, which again is anybody who's registered to vote, provides a signature, a printed name, and their address, municipality, and the date that they signed the petition. And that's where a lot of problems happen. So we're going to get into that in a little more detail in a second. There's also a statement of circulator where the circulator, which is the person who is like going around and actually collecting these signatures, provides their information, which again does not have to be the same person as the candidate. Like if you have like your wife or a friend or whoever helps you out with this, that's where they would provide their information. And they have to basically affirm that they are registered to vote in PA and that they're in the same political party, registered in the same political party as the electors who have signed their petition. There's also the candidate's affidavit, which is the part that needs to be signed in the presence of a notary, where they're also affirming the validity of the petition and their own personal information on it. So they're affirming that they provided their correct residence and district, and they're saying which office they're running for, that kind of thing. The last section on this that I think throws off a lot of people is the waiver of expense account reporting affidavit. And that is basically just if you are going to spend less than $250 on your campaign, which there's probably exceptions to this, but there's very few people that are campaigning at this level of office who go ahead and spend more than $250. It's usually under that limit. And there are things that you can do to spend more than $250 that are probably not necessary. So it's important to kind of think about that and think about like what's appropriate for the level of office that you're running for. But it's recommended to sign even if there's to sign the waiver, even if there's a chance you'll spend more than $250, because you can always file a campaign finance report if you end up spending more, but you have to file a campaign finance report if you don't sign the waiver, whether you spend less than $250 or not. So that's something to look out for. And there are fines for not reporting expenditures over $250 if you spend over and you haven't signed the waiver, or if you spend over, no matter what. I'm gonna also drop a link in the chat here of a really detailed overview of the different sections of the petition, which would be good to kind of reference again once you actually have the petition in front of you, because I'm sure once everyone collects their petitions, they'll want to have another look at all this. Next slide, please, Rachel. So now we're going to talk about making sure that your petition works the way that it's supposed to, and you can actually use it to become a candidate. So something specific to boroughs like Swissvale, where a lot of the time, this says Pittsburgh on our mail, but technically we live in the borough of Swissvale. We want to make sure that you list out, or all of your electors and the candidate lists out Swissvale as the municipality and does not say Pittsburgh. This like little nitpicky thing is something that could get signatures thrown out. Another thing is don't use ditto marks. So especially if you're going to a household and there are multiple electors within a household, people are going to want to put in those ditto marks, and you have to just tell them that they can't, and that everyone who signs your petition needs to fill out everything, all of the columns. So even if you have like partners in a household who have the same address, they just both have to write out their address. If you have ditto marks, that's something that invalidates a signature. As much as possible, you want every signature and the other information in all the columns to be legible, and you want people to avoid nicknames. And you just want to make sure to confirm with everybody as you're getting signatures that they are that they're registered voters in the party that you're running under and that you're collecting signatures for. There are voter lists available through the county to help you focus your efforts. So whenever people talk about like street lists, that's what they're talking about. You can get lists of all the registered voters in your area or the whole county, and you can narrow that down to the district that you're running in, and you can see everyone who's actually registered to vote rather than just like all the households, and everyone who's registered to vote in the party that you're running under. It kind of depends on whether you even need this or not. This is something that's more of an option, but a lot of people don't use this. They just reach out to people who they know who are registered in the right area. Next slide, please, Rachel.
Laura, if I can just add to what you're saying there real quick. I did get a voter list at one point while I was campaigning for office. And I recommend getting it when you go in to get your petitions, and you don't have to, you just say like, I'm running for office, or even I'm considering running for office at the county elections office, and they will give it to you there. But it's not something, at least in my experience, that you can like email them for. They print you out a giant stack of paper. So if you're going to go to the office anyway, make the most of that visit and get it then if you're going to.
Yeah, and I think that technically they can give it to you on a CD, but I'm not sure if ours actually does that or not.
Yeah,
and I don't know if people even can use CDs, if everyone has like a CD drive on their computer or not. But yeah, it's good to at least have on hand, even if you're not going to use it. There's no point in just like leaving it there if it's something that.
And you can snoop on all your
in
neighbors'
case.
party affiliations. It's real fun.
Yeah, you can. I saw the voter list of the candidate who was running last time, and I think the most interesting part was seeing all of the parties that everyone was registered under, because I looked up a lot of parties. I hadn't heard of a lot of those. So we are going to talk now about third-party candidates. So again, this is anybody who's not running as a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter which party other than that, just that anything other than the two majority parties. So like I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between nominating papers and nominating petition. The nominating petition is for the majority parties, Democrat and Republican, and the nominating papers are for everyone else. And the time frame for getting signatures for the nominating petition is about 3 weeks. And for the nominating papers, it's between March 10th and I think it's August 2nd, not 12th. That's a typo there. Or I have a typo on my thing. We'll have to confirm that. But you have a lot longer of a period to collect signatures for the nominating papers, but it's a little more confusing to know how many signatures you need. So it's a calculation that you do. So the number of nominating paper signatures that you need is equal to 2% of the largest vote cast for any candidate in the previous election cycle where there was someone running for that office. So if anybody is going to do this, this is something that it might be helpful for us to just talk to you about separately, because there are ways that we can help you make sure that you have the right number for this. But for example, if a candidate ran like 2 years ago in the last odd numbered election for an office and they won with 1,000 votes, you would need 2% of that. So you would need 20 signatures. Your signatures for nominating papers can be electors registered under any party. They don't have to be under the same party that you are running under, which is a major difference as well. So there is information available on this, and it is kind of hard to find. So like I said, if you are going to run as a third-party candidate, we might want to kind of separately direct you to some resources there, and we can help you figure out that 2% number if you're running in Swissvale. Next slide, please, Rachel. So cross-filing is another kind of thing that you need to think about a little bit because it's not necessarily intuitive. Cross-filing, the definition, what it means is that you're running under multiple parties. So in Allegheny County, usually that would mean that you would be running as a Democrat and a Republican, which kind of means that if you win under both parties, the general election is moot. Since you have already kind of earned the nomination in both parties, there's no one to run against. You're like running against yourself in the general. Most offices that we're talking about, you can't cross-file, it's not an option, but you can for school directors and I believe also magisterial judges. So school directors is the one that's up for election this year. How this works is that you circulate and file a petition for each party that you're cross-filing under. So even if you're a Democrat, you would be circulating and filing petitions for Democrat and Republican. You yourself, as a circulator of petition, can only circulate the Democratic petition if you're a Democrat. So you would need to get someone who's registered as a Republican to circulate the Republican petition. I guess the other thing for this is just that since the Woodland Hills School District's regions are split up the way they are. You just want to make sure that you're collecting signatures from residents of your region. So we're Region 2 again, which is Swissvale, Braddock, Rankin, and Edgewood. So if you're a Swissvale resident who's running, you don't need to get all Swissvale signatures. You need to get signatures. Technically you can get only Swissvale signatures if you want to, but you can potentially get signatures from any of those regions. Next slide, please, Rachel. So here, if anyone has a question, you can let us know by posting in the chat, or we can hear your question.
And for folks that might not be looking at the chat, there had been a question about the cross-filing earlier, and I think you covered that.
Crossfires versus cross-filing, yes, it's an important distinction. And yes, independents like basically follow the same rules as a third-party candidate. On the state, like Department of State candidate website that we link in our guide, it includes all that information together.
Can I ask a question here to kind of go back on a date that you gave us, Miranda?
Sure.
You said that there was an event that SCAC was hosting.
We'll plug
what's-
that at the end, but it's February 17th.
Okay. All right, right after
At the end as well.
the
So
16th start of the, yep, okay, great.
Yeah, so it's the day after that. So last time we did
Mhm.
this, if I remember correctly, some people did bring their petitions and they got signatures. Another thing that we talk about in the guide, but I don't think I mentioned here, is that whenever you're getting signatures, people can only sign as many petitions as positions there are up for election in that cycle. So that's just like a weird thing, but it's good to think about so that signatures don't get invalidated. But an example of that would be, so there's one position for mayor open. So any elector or registered voter can only sign one petition. But for borough council, there's 4 offices up for election. So any like registered Democrat in Swissvale can sign 4 petitions. And that's true of nominating papers as well.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that for nominating papers, like you can sign as many as you want, no matter what you sign, nominating petitions in the primary. So that's something that we get a lot of questions about it. I saw with the Green Party, but yeah, even if you signed a bunch of petitions during the primary petitioning season, you can have those same exact people sign nominating papers.
Okay, I don't think I understood that. We had a question about filing fees, so I'm gonna bring up a list here, but basically none of the borough level offices have a filing fee. Anything above that usually does have a filing fee, but like there's no filing fee for mayor, no filing fee for borough council, no file fee for school director.
Yeah, I think county council has a filing fee, and magisterial district judge, which is not up for election this time, but that one does have a filing fee as well. And one other quick note, somewhat related, we covered this in the guide, but when you go to the county office to pick up your papers, they will hand you basically a packet that includes a whole lot of stuff. There are a few other things in that packet to be aware of. I think it's in our guide, but one of those is kind of it's an ethics law thing where you have to like disclose some financial things. That paper gets filed actually at your municipality's office. and then a copy of it goes to the county. That is described in the packet, but it's something to be aware of because it's different than anything else. Everything else gets filed just directly back at the county. Right, I think, are we good to go? I think we can probably move on to the next section if there aren't any more questions.
There's a question in the chat. Nominating papers are available at the county offices. Is the release date the same as the nominating petition? I believe it's not the same. I don't think that the nominating papers are available until their start date. So after the nominating petitions are already due. Again, that starts on March 10th.
Yeah, and you can always
It goes
count
until August 2nd.
to see, you know, closer to like if they're available a day or two ahead of time. Last time they were available the day before. So, you know, there's a possibility they could come out a little before. Thanks, Tara. Good to see you. Additional follow-up. We'll be doing additional follow-up. Yes. We will be, I think, did we say we're sending another follow-up email? I can't remember.
We can share the slides. If anyone's interested in the slides, we can share that out. And I think everyone should have gotten a copy of the planning worksheet when they got the link. So
Awesome.
that's the main other resource.
Well, thank you guys. This was awesome. I enjoyed my Saturday morning. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We will also we will be making the recording available like publicly, but we'll also directly email it to the folks who registered for this. So that's another follow-up. And then specifically some information about that February 17th event, which will be a little bit more about at the end.
Yep. So let's go ahead and move on to the campaigning section. Next slide for us, Rachel. All right, so the campaigning, you know, for a local office like these borough offices is probably a little bit different. If you've participated in larger campaigns, you know, it might seem intimidating, but you know, if you've participated in, you know, a local representative campaign, presidential campaign, but here in Swissvale at these local levels, trust me, you can do it for sure. It's not as big of a lift, but it can be as big as you want it to be. And you can definitely make a big change or a big splash with relatively little effort, which, I mean, I hate to say, but it's true. We have a small number of voters, which we'll go over in these local elections, unfortunately. Although this year maybe if some of the ballot initiative, if the ballot initiative gets on the ballot this year that they're soliciting for signatures for right now, it may be a bigger year, but usually a pretty small number of voters in these local elections, so you have a big chance to, you know, really make a splash here. And, you know, a little bit of time, as we said, and definitely less than $250. It is very possible, for sure. Next slide, Rachel. So first of all, it's important to know kind of what you're aiming for in terms of how many votes you're looking for, because, you know, rule of thumb is, in general, when you're going for an office, say, such as mayor, where there's just one position available, you want to look at all you need is 50% of the vote plus one. So you can look at it that way. Now, it's a little more complicated when it comes to these council races because there's more candidates on the ballot. So we're choosing up to 4. And in this case, on the screen in 2019, we were choosing up to 3 candidates. So it's a little more complex math, but you know, you're looking at the results from 2019. And Ms. Scales won that election with 884 votes total. So there were at least 884 people that voted in this particular election, but there were more actually than that. And then you can see how close some of these totals were. So there's a bit of a drop between Ms. Scales and Mr. Price, and there was a bit of a drop between Mr. Price and Ms. Ansel, but then Mr. Ansel rather. But then you can see between Mr. Ansel and the next person down, who was actually Ms. Alfonso Wells, who ended up getting appointed later, there was really not a big difference between those two sets of votes. Just a handful, like 50 or so votes separated those folks. So small margins. So, you know, every vote counts, and something to note for this particular election, however, is there were no incumbents running for this election. So that makes this one slightly different than some other elections. But it was a really interesting race. So, but these are the kind of numbers that you're looking for. So, you know, it's not a huge number of people is basically the point there. So next slide for me, Rachel. This was the last time that we had 4 positions open. And again, we're looking at around the same number of votes. The previous election had more, most likely, but 2017, again, those margins are very small. And Petrarca and Stanton and Salisbury are all up for election again. Not sure. Ms. Salisbury is definitely running. She has said so. I don't know about Petrarca and Stanton if they're running or not. But they are up, their positions are up for election. Ms. Gross again was replaced by Ms. Alfonso Wells. And Marty Bush was right below Ms. Stanton just by a handful of votes. So again, small margins. Go to the next slide for me, Rachel. So some things to keep in mind and things to kind of know related to campaigning. First of all, if you're trying to get folks to vote for you, you want to make sure you're pushing voter registration and make sure folks are registered. The last day to register before the primary is that correct? No, that isn't. I don't think that is correct. May 3rd. Need to double check that date. And I'm sorry, Sam said I think we do know, yes, Sean is running for re-election. At any rate, know your community is something that is important. So how do you get to know the community that you're going to be serving? Probably already know a lot of folks in the community, but some resources for you. First of all, in 2019, we did a community listening session as part of our local government event series. That included a listening session and some paper surveys and electronic surveying. That is available on our website at swissvale.org under the resources section. This year, we're also going to be doing some surveying. We're not going to have the in-person listening session, but that's going to kind of be combined with the event on February 17th, which we'll go over at the end. These are good resources for you to know what folks in Swissvale are thinking about, what they care about, and how maybe what you do is, what you want to do is aligned or not aligned with some of those things. All right, Laura says May 3rd is correct. That's the last day someone can register and vote in the primary. All right, good. Excellent. I just had a moment where I was like, well, no, is that right? Attending council meetings and attending these kind of meetings is something that we think you should do to get to know the community. And I had via Zoom there. It's also via unfortunately via Facebook for now for the council meeting itself. And Woodland Hills has their meetings online as well, so you can check those out if you're interested in running for school board. Perusing all the old notes and all of that good stuff, chatting with influencers, folks that kind of know Swissvale. That's a little bit harder to do these days, not meeting folks in person, but if you know other folks in the community who have been involved in local elections, or just folks in our group, for example, or other groups like the Rotary or SEDCO or things like that, those are folks to connect with as well. Know where you stand. In addition to knowing the community, know where you stand on a handful of topics. What are those handful of things that you really care about and why you want to run for local office? And that's something to write in a succinct message when somebody asks you. And Laura has a space for this on the worksheet that we passed out as well. What is your message? And that will really help you in the campaigning, especially right now, because meeting voters is going to be a little bit more difficult. So we can go to the next slide. So meeting voters is going to be different this year because of COVID. You know, folks are still door knocking. You do have to get signatures. So, you know, there are folks that have gone out and done door knocking or stood on a street corner and had that in-person contact. Knowing that you do have to have that, we have a couple of suggestions of things that we've seen other campaigns doing. For example, you know, usually we're using the petition gathering as that point to actually like reach voters for the first time. So have your message ready to go for petition signing. It's not just like, here, sign my petition. It's like, why are you running? and you know, that succinct message that you've developed. The more people you have to help you collect signatures, the fewer each of those individual people will have to come in contact with others. So some of like the signature campaigns that are happening for the ballot initiative right now, they're trying to get a lot of people to solicit petition signatures, so that, you know, like if hundreds of people are doing that and I only have to get, you know, 20 signatures or whatever it might be. In our case, you know, if you have 10 friends that can get one signature, well, I guess if you have 10 friends that can get 2 signatures, you'd be well on your way to getting enough. Of course, follow all this COVID safety protocols. It would be a good idea to put out there, if you have a public presence, be it on social media, or, you know, even if you just want to call around to folks and say, here, I'm going to come around for petition signing soon, but I'm going to follow all these safety procedures. Here's how we can work this out. You know, I'm going to stand 6 feet away. You just sign it and then go back in your house and I'll come and pick it up. That kind of thing. We just did that with a petition that somebody was circulating for the ballot initiative. So you can work that out. And, you know, doing what you can as far as staying safe, and then collecting folks' email addresses at that time too, and phone numbers. That way, you know, if you do want to get back in touch with them, you don't have to do anything in person again. You're just, you know, recontacting potential supporters virtually, email or phone. Use some different resources to make efficient use of your time. So we did talk about already getting the voter list. That will help you make efficient use of your time. If you don't know 10 people in your neighborhood, 20 people in your neighborhood that can sign your petition, you'd be better off not knocking on Republican doors if you're a Democrat. So make sure that you know who's a Democrat by getting that voter list. And then looking at vote getters in previous elections, you know, there is a lot of good reason to get new voters out there. So please do, and please try to encourage folks to register to vote. And we have seen that be successful in Summer Lee's campaign, for example, where they really focused on voters that weren't necessarily always turning out for elections. That was very successful for her. But in pandemic times, to collect some signatures and you want to just go to those folks that are already engaged, that's something you can find out via those voter lists. You can tell how many times people have voted in recent elections via those voter lists. So you can do that. Next slide, Rachel, please. Some other things to consider when campaigning. So here's our event that we are having. It's the Community and Candidate Virtual Cafe. It's on February 17th, starting at 7 o'clock. And the folks that are considering running for office are going to have a chance to get to know, hopefully, some folks in the community. We're going to ask community residents during that session to contribute some of their ideas, hopes, and dreams and concerns for Swissvale. You as a candidate would have a chance to, you know, hear that, internalize that, hopefully. And then we'll do some breakout sessions and things, depending on the number of people involved in that session, to, you know, allow the candidates and the community to interact a bit more during that kind of session. So less talking at folks and more interaction during that Community and Candidate Cafe. That's a great opportunity because it's early in the cycle to find some folks who might do a petition for you, and who might, you know, volunteer to go around and put out yard signs if you're going to do yard signs or door knockers or something like that. So you can find some potential volunteers during that event, and you'll be able to also share with community members during that event a little bit about, you know, what you're interested in running for and why. So that's going to be a good opportunity. We will then also have a virtual candidate forum that will be for the officially declared, the folks that are on the ballot. Those folks then will come and answer questions directly that we will come up with based on community input. So we always solicit input from the community on what do you want to ask these folks, what's important to you, and then we'll get that out to the candidates via those questions. So that's going to be coming up again on February 17th. And there is a separate registration for that. We do have an event already up on our Facebook page for that. And we'll be circulating that on Twitter and Instagram and all of those places as well, sending it out to our email lists and whatnot. But there is already a registration form available for that. All right, next slide, Rachel. So another thing related to campaigning is, name recognition is a huge part of the game in these small local elections. And so some things you can do for that name recognition, I think, in advertising, I think it used to be like 7 impressions and then somebody remembers you. So try to go for that and try for name recognition. So things you can do for that, signs, obviously, you can get signs for pretty cheap, definitely under $250. We did that as part of an endorsement process, which we can mention as well. But you can definitely get signs for that, or do postcards, door hangers, things like that. Slate cards are something that are usually issued by endorsing groups such as the parties themselves, or organizations such as ours or any other organization that might be doing endorsements. You can also then, of course, make major use of social media. In this day and age right now with COVID, that's going to be even more important. Whichever media you choose to get onto. We did have some discussion earlier about folks that aren't on Facebook. That is probably the largest place where Swissvalians are interacting, as well as Nextdoor. But definitely there are a lot of groups on Facebook that Swissvalians are on. So ours, the Swissvale Community Action Committee group, there's a Swissvale group, there's a Watch and Help group, there's a you're from Swissvale group, things like that. So those are all places to potentially reach Swissvalians, and that'll become very important. And then of course there's Twitter, Instagram, things like that. Endorsements are another thing that are that can help you. So related to endorsements, we actually as SCAC have done endorsements in the past for the last local election. It was our first time doing that. And we developed a process for that. And ended up putting out an endorsement that went on signs and on social media and things like that. We are likely going to do that again. We don't necessarily endorse for every office. We don't necessarily endorse for the exact number of candidates that can be endorsed, but it will likely be something that happens again, and we'll get information out to folks ahead of time for that. But the parties do endorsements. We're not actually sure what's going on with the Democratic Party. They alluded to possibly having an endorsement reading already last week. I'm not sure if that happened or not. They were, I think, trying to get that in before the county endorsement committee meeting. It's coming up next week, February, sometime early February. So I'm not sure. Unite is another organization, if you're thinking of running as a progressive candidate, that you might want to seek endorsement from if they're doing some local election endorsements. But other organizations, prominent community members, it doesn't have to be an official endorsement from an organization. It could be somebody that you know in the community who, people think highly of, and you want, if they're willing to put themselves out there and say, hey, I endorse so-and-so for election, that could go a long way in your campaign. So think about that as well. Next slide for me, Rachel. Another thing is coalition building. That might be something you want to consider, is going in with other folks who are like-minded, running for the same type of position, or running for, if you're running for council and you have somebody that's running for mayor that you're very much, aligned with and something, and you want to team up. That has done well for some folks in the past. Elections, for example, in our local representative elections, that has helped. Next slide for me, Rachel. And we're coming to, we're getting towards the end here, but if there are any folks that have questions about campaigning, feel free to put them out there. But things to think about for you, or what are your 2 biggest issues? Try to narrow it down. And what would you say if somebody said, where do you stand on this? Or what's your top issue? And then what do you expect would be your biggest challenge? I think we'll maybe skip over a longer question time now, since it is 11:45, and we'll just roll right into resources and then save questions for the end. So we'll give it back to Laura.
Okay, so here we just want to kind of highlight some things that we found really useful while researching for the guide and for this presentation. All of the ones that we're going to talk about here are linked on the resource page of the guide. So I'm not going to go into them in too much detail, but I would really highly recommend just kind of clicking through there. We made sure all the links were updated for this year. So there's a lot of like good up-to-date information there. So one thing that has been highly recommended by elected officials in the past has been the Local Government Academy's newly elected officials course. Mostly from hearing from people who have gone through this before, this is often like the first time that people find out a lot about what this position will entail. And I know that it's definitely really good for borough council members and mayors, and a lot of people who have gotten into those positions do this as one of the first things once they're in office, and there are scholarships available. And I believe that sometimes in the past, the enrollment fee has been covered by the borough as long as the timing works out. There's also the Ready to Run program from the Center for Women in Politics, which is out of Chatham. This year, it is all virtual and it's free. Normally, it's like in person over like a long weekend, and it is not like super expensive, but some money. So it is actually currently ongoing now. So that's something that you could still enroll in just to kind of get the resources that they've already talked about, and any additional sessions that they have before it wraps up. For anybody who's running for school board, I'd highly recommend looking at the PSBA How to Run for School Board website, because they also have webinars, which I think may have partially been completed already, but there might still be additional webinars for this election cycle. And there's definitely still a lot of information on their website, including, I think, recorded webinars that really tell you a lot about not so much the logistics of like getting on the ballot, but more what will happen once you're a school board official. There's also resources on the Allegheny County Elections Division section of the website. They are pretty limited, but there is a write-up that goes through a lot of stuff about the petitions and about the waiver for campaign finance, and if you actually do have to submit campaign finance. So that's where you would find a lot of that, like specific rules about getting on the ballot. And you can also find the information there about the office itself for when you go. Next slide, please, Rachel. There is a ton of information through the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs. So one of the most relevant is a booklet that they made up that you can download the PDF of, which is the roles and responsibilities of council members and of mayors. And reading through that booklet will really give you a good idea of like, ideally, if everything is working the way it's supposed to, this is supposed to be the role that you're being elected to according to the borough code. So like Miranda mentioned earlier, some boroughs are under home rule, so things are different with them, but Swissvale and most boroughs are really strictly adhering to the borough code. That's like a standard that is carried through most boroughs in the entire state. The borough code itself is also available to download, which might not be like super interesting reading, but something that you might want to refer to certain sections of. And definitely you would want that on hand if you are elected to any borough position. And there are just a bunch of other kind of more specific things about like how do ordinances get passed and things that are really hard to find anywhere else. It is kind of important to remind ourselves that Pennsylvania works a lot differently than other states. So you do want to make sure that you're finding resources specific to Pennsylvania. And this is the main place that you're going to find those. Like if you find things like for Texas, they're not really going to be relevant to you. Everyone does it differently, but Pennsylvania really like does it very differently than anywhere else. Next slide, please, Rachel. There are also a bunch of articles out there about how people have run for local level offices or even like state rep and what has been useful to them. And we have a link to a few of those in the guide, including one from Slate on first-time candidates. And we also have one in the guide now about in-person campaigning and the explainer of PA municipalities that Miranda referenced right up top in the presentation, which is just a kind of good overview when you're kind of entering this confusing system. There's also an article on there about how drug offenses in the past can interact with your eligibility to run, because that is something that we reference in the guide about any kind of previous convictions can influence your eligibility to run. So that's something that you would want to make sure that you look into in advance. And then there are also a lot of kind of technical resources at the Governor's Center for Local Government Services. That is something that they have, basically like a library of things that you can look through. Next slide, please, Rachel. So at this point, we can kind of do overall questions. We do have a couple slides after this, so we'll take like 3 or 4 minutes now if anybody has any questions that they want to get out of the way here.
The event on the 17th, I would assume that's open to anyone, regardless of political party. So if I'm not running as a Democrat or Republican, this is
Yes.
a general thing to meet candidates of any party, regardless of whether or not they're running in a primary.
Yes, that's correct. It's for anybody who is either interested in just being involved as a resident or anybody who is interested in campaigning. Even if it's not this year, you can still go and just like meet people and start seeing who's interested in this. It's
Yeah.
more for like people connecting with each other.
And one thing I will say too regarding that, you mentioned even if you're not in the primary, we definitely highly recommend that if a candidate is running for a third party or independent, to come to these events, even if you're not running in the primary. It is probably the only way to get exposure in Swissvale right now. And so, you know, not trying to toot our own horn, but it's just like the reality of it right now. Maybe some other groups will do some other things, but because the primary often decides things, you know, we do update things. So, another thing I forgot to mention that we do is we put together, at least have in the past, and I think intend to again, a candidate guide once folks are running. So in addition to the forum, we also do a printed guide where we ask candidates to respond to a set of questions that get printed in that guide. And you know, we do update that for the general election. When third party folks appear again, we may do another forum, but not necessarily. So we definitely hope that folks that run third party can get into these events in before the primary. We did have a third party candidate running for council last time, got a fair number of votes despite not doing a ton of campaigning. So it was close, for sure. So definitely, you know, with a little bit of campaigning, I think third party and independent can really do well in Swissvale.
So the cards are stacked against you, obviously, so do as much as possible.
Exactly.
Understood.
Yeah.
Use the system.
And then overthrow it.
Sean, did you ask your question yet?
No, just in listening to this, I had a question, and maybe someone here could shed some light on this. So, you know, a lot of what you're talking about obviously pertains to school board, pertains to council, mayor, and those. Why are judge of elections and the elections things elected officials? A lot of what you said today, a lot of the stuff you said doesn't apply to. It doesn't matter if I'm running for judge of elections. It doesn't matter what my stance is on a certain issue, because I'm not there to enforce my own views. I'm there as an instrument of the county to enforce election law that was passed well above that level, either the county or the state level. or, you know, decisions that were made on the judicial area for whenever the legislature couldn't get off its butt to make those things. So I don't get the notion that, because I worked as judge of elections last year. I was not here. They put me in Penn Hills, but I wasn't there as an instrument of the county. I was there essentially as a paid volunteer, for lack of a better word. So it seems odd that, you know, in order to run, I'd have to get signatures, and if people ask where I stand on issues, it's like, well, what does it matter where I stand on issues? The county will decide what those issues are. I'm there to make sure you can vote.
Well,
Do you mind if I comment too, Sam?
yeah, I just want to really quickly say that as long as SCAC has been involved in creating election guides, we have not known about judges or inspectors running. So we have not engaged prior, like, and I don't know that we have an intent to do like a questionnaire or the candidate forum with the judges and the inspectors, or it would be something separate, because you're right that the issues are very different. Like, you know, your stance on police and schools is, you know, not nearly as relevant as it is for like a school director. So I'll say that we don't have a precedent for doing that with those offices. We're just promoting that they are elected, or they can be elected. They are most often appointed, like you have found, because people aren't running for them, probably because they're not aware that they can run for them. That's, I mean, part of what we're doing here is trying to raise up that information, just making it available to people so that they know that that's an opportunity. I mean, as to your first question as to why they're elected, I haven't the slightest idea, but I'd love to hear what Karen has to say.
Fair enough.
Well, what I would comment on is that, yeah, I think some of these things are important to be elected for. But Sean, you bring up an excellent point that if you do bring your party platform into being the judge in particular, that can be incredibly dangerous. And that's what I experienced some 20 years ago when I was a constable here in Swissvale. And I was appalled and pushed to become judge because of the power that an individual has when they're judge. I would suggest that those who are running to be a judge of elections literally go out and see if they can find two people from the other two parties to become their majority and minority elected officials, because it's critical that as people are stepping up to vote, that they see representation of all the parties in Swissvale. It makes no difference that the Democratic Party is the largest party in Swissvale. In our election system, as you alluded to, Sean, we have to have our electors feel confident that their vote is being protected, no matter what what political party they are. And they need to see those people literally sitting at the table. So, but
oh no, I
yeah,
agree.
you're absolutely right.
No, and as a member of what I'm sure is the minority party in this area, it also is important that too. I remember when I was working the past election, the county put me in Penn Hills for lack of, I guess, anywhere better. That we had one gentleman came in who was obviously looking to cause some problems in a majority Democratic area, and all of a sudden he was the judge of elections, and where he was trying to go was a young white male, and he definitely did not know how to process that, because he was expecting that he was going to be up against probably some African-American, person who he was going to be able to yell, oh, voter suppression or blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden he didn't know how to process that there was some guy telling him, no, this isn't how this works here. So no, I definitely think that's the thing. But that's why I just like listening to all this. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, like obviously for council or mayor, all this makes sense, but like, no one, yeah, you're like Sam said, no one needs to care where my position is on police and schools. I'm running judge of elections. And even if I did have a strong position on that, it doesn't matter, because I'm not there to enforce that. You come in, or you here to vote? Great. Have fun.
Just because we're low on time, I want to make sure. Jay, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick on the the judge of election stuff. I'm with the Green Party. We're a minority party in every area, and we've dealt with a lot of voter suppression actively from election officials in the polling place. Telling people not to vote Green. People have gone not to jail, but they've had their voting privileges removed for doing. People have been convicted for this stuff. So the election official stuff is really important to our party as a minority party, because we face that sort of oppression regularly. And then I also wanted to add, we were talking about resources before. I think you said you might talk about endorsements, but so often candidates don't get a lot of support from the political party, even if they're endorsed beyond slate cards. But if anyone is thinking about running as a green official, we get our candidates on the ballot, we provide volunteers, we provide donations. We support our candidates a lot more than many other parties do. So that's something to consider too when thinking about resources.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, how about let's do the last couple of slides and then we can maybe hang on for a couple minutes after if anybody has any follow-ups. Sam, do you want to take it?
Yes, hello, that's me again. So we just want to reiterate that we're doing this. Oh, Porter. He's been making noise as soon as I unmute. We're going to be doing this virtual cafe where we're going to be doing some surveys in advance of the event to collect some community feedback and start to understand what the community priorities are right now, even before the event for people who can't attend. And we're going to attempt to do make some of those available in paper form too, just as a nod to our interest in accessibility that has been brought up here today. So that's February 17th, 7 to 9 p.m. We are requiring candidates to register and requesting that residents do, just so that we can have a sense of how many folks to expect and how to plan our breakout sessions and what we want to do. Because we always want to be very cognizant of everyone's time and not drone on for 4 or 5 hours, which can quickly happen. As a reminder too, we will also do that candidate forum later in the cycle with declared candidates. And the last time we did it, we had it with the school board candidates and the council candidates at the same time. Because some of their issues overlapped and some of them didn't. We may, depending on how many candidates there are in any given office, we may split things up. That's to be determined after the petition period is over. But we will do that printed guide again, like Miranda said, and we are likely to endorse again, which we will follow up with everybody, that information that once we have solidified all of it. So we hope that you'll all join us at this upcoming event in February. We will send out emails and other information to remind you. Also, I mean, like Laura and Miranda have been great about popping the links into the chat throughout the day, but you can find all this stuff over at swissvaleorg.org or swissvaleaction.com. That also goes there. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are all volunteers, so we do our best, but we're not a political machine. We're not always on top of everything, but we're trying our best to better our community by making this information available and communicating with folks. Do we have a next slide? I don't remember. Oh yeah, this is our, but so we're really big on people power. And also, when we send out emails sort of regularly, so if you're not big on social media, you can sign up for our email list, also at swissvale.org in the footer. You can, if you're interested in being updated on what's going on with us, but don't want to be tracking Facebook or whatever, because we totally understand that. I don't know. Do we have anything else to add, guys? I can't, I think this is a wrap. We can stay on for a couple more minutes if there are any like lingering questions. But otherwise we will follow up. We'll make the recording available publicly, and we'll send it to all the registrants. And we're really grateful to all of you for showing up and engaging and asking some great questions and providing some great information. This is how we make a community rock. So we're excited to meet new people and see all of these fresh faces here.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
And just a reminder, if anybody is sure they're going to run, you can announce your candidacy like now if you want. Like you don't have to wait to
Right
do
now.
it. That's it.
Tell us.
Yeah.
But you don't have to. We're not,
Yeah.
this-
Just
we're
I
not-
mean, in general,
we're just saying if you want to jump in and be like, I'm running for mayor, you can do that, but you don't have to. So okay, that I think we can.
All right.
Karen, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm seriously considering running for mayor.
Okay, very cool.
It's important for me though to talk to, and this is going to sound political, but I've gotten involved for a number of years. I really want to talk to constituents that I know that are longtime Swiss Valers, as well as folks who've just moved in. So I'm really exploring it. So I really appreciate the opportunity though, to say that I'm serious about running.
Awesome.
All right, great. We're glad to hear that.
Yeah, and any of us we're always open for conversations for that kind of thing as well. And feel free to reach out at any time through the general email or through Facebook or anything too. So awesome. Sean? Oh,
Sorry, just to clarify something. So like, because I'm considering running for judge of elections. So I would need to find 10 voters of my party, not just within Swissvale, but literally within my voting precinct. So I believe
if you're running as a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, I'd be running as Republican. So I'd be looking for 10 Republican votes or signatures in, I think, Ward 5 I'm in.
Yeah.
So that would be the hurdle I'd have to overcome. And then also win the primary, which I'd probably run opposed there, and then also win the general, who knows who the Democrat would be on that one. Am I getting that process correct?
Well,
If
yeah,
you
the
but you may not
petition.
be opposed. Like that's the thing is that with 22 or 11 judges, like it's like we've said, like the running rate for these things
It's low.
so low that
Yeah.
like you might actually not be opposed in the general. And I know at least a couple of Republicans around the corner from, because for those who don't know, Sean is my direct next door neighbor. So
Yeah,
we're in
literally. Yeah.
District 5. I can't sign your petition, but
I know.
you can find 10. I'm sure you can.
No, and hearing that too is also how like people who could circulate a petition, and like, it has to be in your party to even circulate. I'm like, oh, my wife can't even circulate my petition for me. That's just sad. So, okay, but I'm just making sure I had that level of, yeah, I'm well aware there's Republicans over there too, Sam, don't worry. Yeah, but no, I was like thinking of that, like, man, that's going to be an interesting hurdle to overcome. If you don't get that, then what it would be like a write-in kind of situation? Is that what we'd be looking like? You'd be looking at there, trying to get people to write in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Just wanted to thank this was informative. I'm definitely not running for anything higher than the election stuff, but I did it in 20 and it was fun-ish. So I'm looking to do that again going forward. And honestly, the county has told me that even if that they're going to put me wherever they can put me.
mm-hmm.
Anyway, but if I ran here, I'd be guaranteed to be, up the street, as opposed to, oh, you're going to be in Moon. Have fun getting there at 6 a.m. So, all right, I'm going to jump off, but thank you guys. This is very informative.
Thanks.
Okay, any other quick questions before we wrap up?
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Rachel, for being our slide advancer.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for all putting this together.
All right, we're gonna stop recording, and then we're gonna stop our live stream. So bye everybody.
Bye all.